Hello and welcome. I must say thank you guys for all the support. Through the power of analytics, I've noticed that a good chunk of my audience works in sales and marketing. Um, so I'm going to try and cater my videos a little bit more towards you guys, or at least give you guys more concrete examples. So with that, let's get started, and let's talk about more about how to talk about AI. And in particular, I want to talk a little more about the training section, the training part of AI. So we start with you know our input output model. So this is what I've stressed in the past video about how you should name your models. Uh, but this is what you're selling, right? Well, actually, you're just selling the output. You're not selling the model. You're just selling the output. Um, and to the engineers, I know that that might sound a little harsh because you guys probably worked weeks, months on these models and collecting the data, getting all the inputs, and to produce this. But in terms of sales, in terms of marketing, in terms of people on the business side, like they're most concerned, or they're primarily the first thing you think about is what are the outcomes, and so what is that output. And so on the engineering side, you guys got to remember, this is what's really important. This is the first thing that a lot of the business side, what they're going to look at, and so that's usually the first things you should talk about as well. um, okay, but sometimes this level of detail is not enough. That just talking about the output of a model, and even if you can string it together with all the other outputs and tell a very convincing story, sometimes that's not enough for sales and marketing. Um, so let's go one level deeper. Let's talk about the model while it's in training. So to sort of give you guys some background if you're not familiar, right? So we still have the input, the model, and the output, right? So that's the data going into the model, it produces an output. So what's different about it during training? Well, during training there is the ground truth, okay? So and then there's a part where we compare the ground truth with the output that the model produced, and we check it. We check to see if it was right. Um, and then there's some fancy math behind it and some calculus, but and in the end, we use that check to update the model, and then we try again and again and again for, it could be anywhere up towards a million times. Luckily, with computers, we can do that, right? So that's how model training works. And the important part here that you did not see before is that the fact that in order for it to train, it needed a ground truth, um, for it to learn what to do. Um, and I don't want to throw out too many terms, but this is actually only for supervised learning. So if that term sounds foreign to you, that's okay. There are other kinds of machine learning out there, but this is just supervised learning. So I don't want to throw out too many terms for you guys. But let's just stick with this one. So all right. So now that we have our input, our model, our output, and our ground truth, um, you know, how is that helpful, right? Like, why should you in sales and marketing even care about this sort of training step, right? So let's step through in a little detail. I feel like a good question to maybe take a look at is, what was that input? Uh, so if you think about it, you know, what your model was trained on is very important, but also what was your model not trained on? So, if you have a model that was trained on English and you give it French, you wouldn't expect it to work, right? Now, that sounds like a really silly example because I explicitly stated that the input was English and I explicitly stated that you tried French. And that's the thing about communication, right? Is that when you are explicit, it's so obvious, people wonder why you even gave that as an example. But the reason why communication is so important, where it falls, is when people aren't explicit and then those assumptions are made, and bad things happen, right? So let's continue on. What are some other things about the input? Um, Now, you can have lots of examples in your input, but sometimes the distribution of that data is not ideal or is not what you would expect in the future. Uh, so that's like an example where if your if your training data has, let's say, a lot of American English, but then in a couple of months down the line you get some British English, um, and if that distribution wasn't there and your user base has changed or things like that, you might run into some problems. You might not, but you might. And so, from the business side, it's very important to ask that question about the distribution of the data and to think about, if the data that the model was trained on does it really represent the real world data. Um, and and I guess, more than just distribution representation, it also allows the machine learning engineers to think about the business use cases. And so, in particular, when we think about just the input, right, that those inputs come from the real world. And if you are in sales and marketing, there's a good chance that you actually understand the end user. You understand what else is going on, actually better than what the engineers understand. And so that's why it's very important for people on the business side to communicate these things to the engineering side. And this is a good start, right? Because if you're on the business side, you can ask questions. You can ask those important questions about, what business cases are here, and then you can think of other ones and raise them to the engineering team and ask them, like, hey, in your data set, do you have this business case? And I think that's very important. I think that's one of the valuable things that the business side can bring to the engineering side. Another new thing that you might notice in here is the ground truth, right? And so the important thing to think about when you're asking questions about the ground truth would be, who decided that this would be the ground truth? It gets a little philosophical, sorry, but it is very important to think about, like, what was the ground truth and who decided that that would be the ground truth. And so maybe to give you a concrete example. So let's say, at Phenom, we are in, the HR tech realm. So, if we have a model that's trying to predict, how good a candidate is for a job, and the ground truth was past hires. So when you think about that, okay, if that was the ground truth, that sounds like a reasonable ground truth. But who decided that ground truth? Well, that was every single hiring manager in the past, right? So you got to ask yourself, well, if that was the ground truth, is that a good truth, right? Did I have good hiring managers in the past? Did they actually make good hiring decisions in the past? Do they have any innate biases in the past? And so if all of those things were part of the ground truth, and these were the people that decided the ground truth, your algorithm, or sorry, your model is going to inherit all of the things from that ground truth, whether good or bad. It will do both, right? It will inherit everything that because it learns from the ground truth. So if the ground truth was good, it will learn good things, right? And if it was bad, it will learn bad things. So that's very important for the business side to start thinking about, is like, where did this ground truth come from? And to at least start questioning and start thinking to himself, at least the way I think about it is like, what's your gut check? Yeah, is that gut check good enough? Because a lot of these questions are actually really hard to answer. There's no, like, right or wrong way to answer these questions. So I would at least pose these questions so that we can have that discussion, and that you can at least get the initial gut check on it. And on the engineering side, right, I think it's also very important that I think most engineers know that, like, the model is heavily dependent on that ground truth. And so for the engineering side, I think it is very important for you guys to communicate, where did you get this ground truth and how you plan on using it for your model. And if anything, it's at least a good soundboard. It's like, when you, as an engineer, if you can convey this idea to a product manager, someone in marketing, because they have to write about it, right? If you can convey this to them and they understand it and they don't immediately have, 1,000 questions about the validity of it, then that at least gives you some confidence that, like, okay, you're probably on the right track, at least from a business perspective. And I think that's also very critical. And that's, again, why I would encourage everybody from both sides of the business to come to the table and talk about these things. So, guys, I want to say thank you for watching. I'm really happy about all the support that I get from this. If you guys have any more questions, or anywhere where you want to, if you have questions or feedback on things, I'm very open to that. And if not, I'm actually thinking my next video is probably going to be on bias. I feel like that's a very hot topic. So let me know if that's what you want to hear, or if you want to hear about other things. Thanks, guys.